Hello, I'm J. Jermaine Bay of Melodian Morse Cranium, Ante, Colorado. The acronym is AMPAC. I'm the Chief Judge of Consular Court. Today is Class 82. Class 82. What did we learn in Class 81? Well, we're finishing up with the reading of chapters 3 and 4 of the United Nations Charter of 1945, right? So what we were learning in the charter is about organization. The Moors have to build a strong foundation of an organized dual society, right? What does organs in the General Assembly really talk about? It's about putting together the committees, the departments, right? Like any government has several different departments that take care of the affairs of that state, right? It's just the administrative arm of your government, right? So we learned in the Treaty Affairs of 1912, the first word out of the 6 different words I was highlighting in the Treaty Affairs, the first word was what? Administrative, right? So the General Assembly and the organs take care of the administration, right? So let's use the United States as an example. So the U.S. administration is what? The Office of the Presidency. And the Office of the Presidency right now currently in December 2022 is Joseph Biden. And Joseph Biden has a cabinet, right? He's placed all these officers and appointed people inside of a cabinet. Well, that cabinet is what you consider the organs, the departments, the committees, etc., right? That's government. That's now set forth an organized dual society, right? And then obviously the United States has its legislative branch that also has its several organs within it, committees, departments, etc. And then you've got the judicial branch, right? That deals with the U.S. Supreme Court and all of its inferior courts, right? Even though they're courts of an organization, they're still courts nonetheless, right? So this is what the Moors have to learn. We also have to put together our 3 branches of government. We have to understand what organs and the General Assembly, what does assembly mean? To assimilate, right? A composition, to acquire, right? We have to come together and acclimate ourselves into an organized dual society of overlapping departments and committees, etc. It's a lot of responsibility, Moors. Well, like I told you, what's going to assist us? Well, as you start to read the Act Algeciras of 1906, Articles 105 and 106 tells us that really what we need to learn how to do is be the controllers over the other trustees and managers who already have a system in place of government. Right? So what we have to learn is to be the subject matter experts to oversee everything the United States is doing, right, with our own Moroccan law, right? So we'll learn more about that in the future. All right, let's go ahead and continue into Class 82. Obviously, AMPAC study session always opens up with the Constitution. The Constitution is the most important first step for all the Moors. If the Moors do not have a Constitution, then you cannot constitute what's commonly known as your human rights as a Moroccan, right? So the Constitution is the first step in order for you now to accede to the treaties. In order for you to be able to enforce the supreme law of the land, first you have to have a Constitution, because only the state can become a party to the treaties, right? So if Moors want to enforce the treaties, if Moors want to enforce the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the United States of America, well, the first thing we needed was our own Constitution. And then accede to all the treaties, right? Ratified, deposited, and promulgated. That way we can enforce it with full force, full powers, right? With our competent authority of the state. Okay? Okay, let's go ahead and get into the class. All right, so now we're in Chapter 5 of the Security Council. Okay? Now, before we get into Security Council, up here on the board, I've got written up here, the Charter of the United Nations. Article 5. What is Article 5 really about? About the Security Council, but it's about diplomacy, number 1. Number 2 is about economic, which is sanctions. And it's also about the military force. So the Security Council, which is 5 permanent member states, right? So you got China, France, Russia, United States of America, and you got who? France, right? So those 5 permanent Security Council members are ultimately responsible for maintaining diplomacy on planet Earth. They're ultimately responsible for maintaining economics, right? So let's say a state is acting up, the Security Council can come in and put sanctions against that state and isolate them. And last but not least, military force, right? So that's what the Security Council's basic concept is, all right? So we'll learn more about that today, all right? So, like I said, Morris, Chapter 5, the Security Council. So as we already know, the Security Council is made up of these 5 permanent Security Council states. But the word permanent is kind of a word that's alluring. Because what does permanent mean? Permanent means permanent, right? But the reality is everything is subject to change by vote, right? As you read the charter, any member can be removed from the charter as a member if in fact they're doing anything to be a belligerent, right? So when they use the word permanent, is it really permanent? Not necessarily, because anybody can be voted off as a member. So don't let the word permanent fool you, Morris. It's only about vote. If the other member states vote to remove a state, the Security Council will come in and enforce that. But the Security Council also has the power to restore a state status back to the charter. We'll talk about that some more, all right? So as you can see, Morris, you got the United States of America, Great Britain, you've got Russia, France, and China. Now, the reason why I have this up here as an image is because we want to talk about this a little deeper today, right? We're talking about the Security Council, which is talking about these 5 states primarily. But keep in mind, the Security Council also consists of 10 other non-permanent states, right? So you got these 5 plus 10 more. And the other 10 states rotate every 2 years. So they have a 2-year stay, right? And then you got 5, so it's a total of 15. But at the end of the day, these 5 states right here, they don't rotate. They just remain in place. And at the end of the day, they have what's called veto power, right? So let me quickly go into that. So let's say out of the 15 states of the Security Council, 9 of those states says yes, they vote yes to something. Well, guess what? Any one of these permanent member states can veto it, just one, right? France can come in and say, nah, I want to veto it, even though there's already been a majority vote, even if it's been more than 2/3 vote, right? So let's say 14 states of the Security Council vote yes on something. All it takes is one vote from one of these 5 to say no. It's a veto power. One state out of the 5 can say no, and it kills the whole deal based upon any resolution regarding what? These basic foundation, right? These principles of diplomacy, economic sanctions, or military force. So as we talk about that a little bit more today, I'm going to let the good brother Pierre get into it a little bit. Pierre from International Law of MOC, M-O-O-C, on YouTube. We'll talk about that today. Let good brother Pierre tell you a little bit more about the Security Council, right? All right, let's go ahead and go in a little deep. Let's just read a couple of articles, just to do a basic overview. Then we'll let good brother Pierre tell you a little bit more about it with an overview. Then we're going to come back and break it down about these 5 so-called permanent member states. Okay? Let's get into it.
Chapter 5, the Security Council, Composition. Article 23. 1. The Security Council shall consist of 11 members of the United Nations, the Republic of China, France, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America shall be permanent members of the Security Council. The General Assembly shall elect 6 other members of the United Nations to be non-permanent members of the Security Council. Due regard being specially paid in the first instance to the contribution of members of the United Nations to the maintenance of international peace and security and to other purposes of the organization, and also to equitable geographical distribution.
Continue.
2. The non-permanent members of the Security Council shall be elected for a term of 2 years. In the first election of the non-permanent members, however, 3 shall be chosen for a term of 1 year. A retiring member shall not be eligible for immediate re-election. 3. Each member of the Security Council shall have 1 representative. Functions and powers. Article 24. 1. In order to ensure prompt and effective action by the United Nations, its members confer on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agree that in carrying out its duties under the responsibility of the Security Council acts on their behalf. 2. In discharging these duties of the Security Council shall act in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. The specific powers granted to the Security Council for the discharge of these duties are laid down in chapters 6, 7, 8, and 12. 3. The Security Council shall submit annual and, when necessary, special reports to the General Assembly for its consideration. Article 25. The members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council in accordance with the present charter. Article 26. In order to promote the establishment and maintenance of international peace and security with the least diversion of armaments of the world's human and economic resources, the Security Council shall be responsible for formulating, with the assistance of the Military Staff Committee referred to in Article 47, plans to submit to the members of the United Nations for the establishment of a system for the regulation of armaments.
All right, thank you, good brother Marcus. Okay, so let's go back up. Okay, so we got chapter 5, right, Morris? It's about the Security Council, right? So these 5 member states, and we've already taken a look at the image, right? So these 5 member states are ultimately responsible, primarily responsible for the security of planet Earth. 5. However, there's a total of 15 states. But at the end of the day, these 5 are ultimately responsible for the peace and security of planet Earth, right? So that's a lot of power placed in the hands of just 5 states out of 193. In addition to that, we'll find out a little bit more about the veto power of these 5, because only one of them states, just one. So one state, take for instance, if it's France, can veto what the other 192 states would like to do. This is how the charter was set up. It gave a lot of power to these 5. And they also turned around and said they were permanent. Okay? So let's go back to the charter. So keep in mind, Morris, the charter has been amended a few times. Okay? So the charter, especially Article 23, the Security Council shall consist of 11 members of the United Nations. Well, that's been amended. Okay? And I'll show the more about the amendment in a different class. Okay? But today we're going to stay focused. So the Security Council shall consist of 11 members, but right now it's 15, so that was amended. Okay? Of the United Nations, the Republic of China, France, the Union of Soviet Socialist Reform, right? Republic. So that's your USSR, which has been changed to now what? Russia. So it's been amended, right? The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So you know Northern Ireland is not one of the security members, right? So that's been amended. And the United States of America, proper party name, not the United States, international organization, shall be permanent members of the Security Council, okay? Then it turns around and says the General Assembly shall elect 6 other members of the United Nations to be non-member members of the Security Council. And now we know that's now changed to 10, right? So they say 6 here, but it's 10. So you got 10 non-members, non-permanent, and then you got 5 permanent, okay? So it continues to say what? Let's move on. It says United Nations, we're just finishing up that particular article. So United Nations to the maintenance of international peace and security, and to the other purposes of the organization, and also to equitable geographical distribution. Then it continues, section 2. The non-permanent members of the Security Council shall be elected for a term of 2 years. In the first election of the non-permanent members, however, 3 shall be chosen for a term of 1 year. A retiring member shall not be eligible for immediate re-election. Section 3, each member of the Security Council shall have 1 representative. Functions and powers. Okay, listen up, Morris. Functions and powers. Powers, right? This is pure power. Now, there's a lot of people on planet Earth that have what's called influence. You have influencers. But influencers think they have power. They don't technically have power. Who has power? Legislators, who control opinion. Now, at the end of the day, who truly holds the power? The people. The people of the state, the people of planet Earth hold the ultimate power to ensure that the administrators, the agents who are sitting in the seats of government, enact legislation on behalf of the people. But right here in the charter says functions and powers. Powers of who? The Security Council, right? Because they're utilizing what? Over here, the Security Council. It's about diplomacy. They got the power to utilize sanctions, and they got the power to utilize the military. That's a lot of power when you have a military behind it, right? And the power of the pen. So listen, Article 24, in order to ensure prompt and effective actions by the United Nations, its members confer on the Security Council primary responsibility. Primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agree that in carrying out its duties under this responsibility, the Security Council acts on their behalf. Now, catch what that just said. So the Security Council, see right here? The Security Council acts on their behalf. On whose behalf? All states on planet Earth. Because the United Nations can pull together a military, right? The United Nations can deal with not only diplomacy, but they also can deal with sanctions. They can sanction a state. But they also can set forth the military. On behalf of who? All member states, as well as a non-member state. So the Security Council, this is key, has the primary responsibility to act on their behalf. Who's there? All states on planet Earth, right? So it's two things the Security Council is dealing with mainly. And that is what? Dealing with a belligerent head of state who's doing something to infringe the rights of another state. So now the Security Council can come in and now deal with the removal of that head of state. But what else can the Security Council do? Let's say that head of state is infringing upon the rights, the human rights of its own nationals, right? So now the military can come in and represent the nationals of that state to deal with that belligerent head of state, right? So the Security Council acts on their behalf. I'm really underscoring that for a reason. Because if in fact the Security Council is the primary responsibility of protecting planet Earth, well, where do they derive the power from? The charter, right? Because the charter is a contract. And anyone who accedes to the charter has agreed that the United Nations Security Council will provide some type of military or sanctions or diplomacy bylaws to help protect your state. If your state is now being infringed by another state and you petition the Security Council and the General Assembly, they have an obligation, right? They have to act on behalf of our state, our Moroccan state. That's their primary responsibility. But it goes deeper than that, Morris. If in fact the charter gave them this power, then what gave the charter its power? Listen to my words. What ultimately gave the charter its power to enact these provisions and these functions and powers? It was France. France allowed the charter. France granted the power to allow the charter to come into existence. Where? In Morocco. We'll talk about that today, all right? But first, let's listen to good brother Pierre. Give us just a general overview of the Security Council, right? So let's go ahead and click on Pierre now. So this is Pierre's YouTube channel, right? It's called International Law Mock. I highly recommend that the more subscribe to this channel, right? Good brother Pierre. So please subscribe to his channel. Right now he has about 20,000 subscribers. So please, he does a really good job of teaching the fundamentals of international law. Basic fundamentals, right? Generic fundamentals. However, in AMPAC study session, you'll learn how to enforce international law from your own interest on being Moroccans. And what you're going to learn today is the Moors have a lot of responsibility as it relates to security. Okay? So let's go ahead and let good brother Pierre tell us a little bit about the Security Council. This video is about 8 minutes, okay? Now, before I hit play, listen to Pierre. Pierre is a very calm, cool, collected person. But listen to his frustration. Listen to the fact that you can hear that he's saying out loud that it's asinine that one state gets to make a decision on behalf of 193 member states and non-member states. Just listen to how he talks, okay? I'm building you up right now more. So let Pierre tell you something, then I'm going to go way deeper past what Pierre is saying, okay? Let's go ahead and get started.
From week 2, you may remember how the United Nations came to existence at the end of the Second World War and how the World Organization is structured. In particular, you may remember the central position of the Security Council, which is the organ having, in the words of Article 24 of the UN Charter, having the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. You remember also that the Security Council is made of 15 members, 5 of which are permanent members. And those permanent members are, as you know, probably China, France, Russia who took over from the USSR, also the United Kingdom and the United States of America. They are often referred to as the P5 nations, permanent members. And then there are 10 other countries sitting at the Security Council. Those are non-permanent members of that organ, and they are elected for a term of 2 years by the General Assembly. Originally, the composition of the Security Council was of 11 members, including the P5. The number of the non-permanent members has been increased from 6 to 10 by an amendment to the Charter that entered into force in 1965. The various non-permanent members elected are taken from the various regions of the world. And you can find many details on the composition and work of the Security Council on the UN website. Let me quickly recap how the Security Council takes its decisions and what are its powers under the Charter. Under Article 27 of the Charter, each member of the Council has 1 vote, and decisions are taken by an affirmative vote of 9 members out of 15. When decisions do not relate to procedural matters, paragraph 3 of Article 27 says that the majority of 9 out of 15 which is needed for a decision, that this majority must include, I quote, the concurring votes of the 5 permanent members. However, in practice, and as made clear by the ICJ in the Namibia advisory opinion, it has been consistently accepted that the voluntary abstention by a permanent member does not prevent the resolution to be adopted by the Council. In other words, if a permanent member wants to prevent the adoption of a resolution, it must cast a negative vote. Such negative vote is called a veto if the majority of 9 has been reached. Each permanent member is thus conferred by the Charter the extraordinary right to veto the adoption of a resolution, despite the fact that more than 9 members of the Council have voted in favor of the draft resolution. If the draft resolution is supported by less than 9 members of the Council, and that no majority exists in its favor, the negative vote of a permanent member does not prevent by itself the resolution to be adopted. And in such a situation, the negative vote of any permanent member should not be understood as a veto. The resolution is not adopted because it is not supported by at least 9 members of the Council. There have been many criticisms of the veto power of the permanent members, and there have been many attempts also to reform the veto right. It is indeed quite astounding that an organization which is premised on the equal sovereignty of its members bestows upon some of them such an unequal privilege. But as you know, this is the result of an historical situation, and it reflected the status of the world by the end of the Second World War. One can criticize the veto power of the P5 nations, but it is undoubtedly part of the legal rules that each UN member state has duly accepted by ratifying the Charter. And despite many attempts to reform the right of veto, no changes have so far been brought to that system. And no legal change could be brought to it without the consent of each of the permanent members, because under Article 108 of the Charter, amendments to the Charter require to be ratified by 2/3 of the UN members, including all the permanent members of the Security Council. So any legal change to the veto system requires that those having the veto accept to change it. As you can see, the procedure at the Security Council is quite demanding because the veto of the P5 is a constant threat. Therefore, prior negotiations between the main players are essential to get a resolution through. And this is the stuff of high-level diplomacy. And the wording of important resolutions are not only negotiated in New York between the ambassadors, but it is also sometimes directly negotiated from capital to capital. And also sometimes a draft resolution is tabled without real prior negotiations, but with the clear expectation that it be vetoed, just to be able to make the headlines and try to lay the blame on the vetoing power. And this is, again, the usual game of diplomacy. Let me turn now to the powers of the Security Council. The Council has different powers, most notably under Chapter 6, 7, and 8 of the Charter. Chapter 6 concerns the pacific settlement of disputes. In that regard, the Council has a power of recommendation. It may adopt resolutions that recommend inside member states to do something, but it cannot decide that they must do something. In particular, the Security Council cannot impose on a member state to refer a dispute to arbitration or to the ICJ. It may suggest that, but jurisdiction will always rest on the consent of the disputing parties. Chapter 8 of the Charter relates to regional arrangements. In substance, the Charter does not preclude the settlement of disputes or the maintenance of peace and security through regional fora. But any enforcement action by a regional organization needs prior authorization by the Security Council. In other words, the Security Council stands ultimately above regional arrangements or regional organizations when it comes to using force.
All right, so that's good, Brother Pierre, giving you a basic overview. This right here is video number 93 out of his 100. Video number 94, etc. Video 94 gets into part 2 of him explaining the Security Council. We'll get into that another day, okay? But let's go back to what the good brother said. Around the 4-minute and 30-second mark, okay? Let's go back to around 4 minutes, 30 seconds.
By the end of the Second World War, one can criticize the veto power of the P5 nations, but it is undoubtedly part of the legal rules that each UN member state has duly accepted by ratifying the Charter.
So when he says the 5, right? He said the P5. Well, who's the P5? Let's go back to it. This is the P5, the permanent 5. And he's saying they got the veto power. Just one of these states can veto. Even if the other 14 states on the Security Council says yes to some type of diplomacy or sanction or military reform, one state can say veto and say no, and it kills the deal. But what did Pierre tell us? He said they have the veto power based by what? The Charter's provisions. They have the legal right to do it. One state can do it. But what does legal right mean? Okay, let's go back to it. Follow me. The Charter, right? We're back to the Charter of 1945. What is the Charter? It is a convention. It is an arrangement, right? Based upon the Act Algeciras of Article 123, the Charter is an arrangement. It is a legal document, proper written instrument that allowed the states to come together, to put together an organized dual society to try to bring peace on earth. But within that charter, that proper written legal instrument called the Charter, the P5 put in provisions to give them veto powers. They were only looking out for themselves, right? So it almost appears as though the United Nations says it has 193 member states, but the grim reality is it really comes down to 5. The United Nations is really 5 states that have the functions and the power to enact law or veto law. 5 out of 193 member states. That's not even counting the non-member states, right? Now, that sounds like a problem. Even Pierre, you can tell he's complaining about it, right? He even said in the video that there have been several challenges to try to create reforms to remove the veto power of the Security Council. Ultimately, what needs to happen? There's no way they should have veto power. It should be 2/3 vote, period. But since the reform is in the Charter allowing them to veto, can nobody change it? Or maybe someone can change it. And who is the someone? Moroccan Moors. I'll prove that today. Because Pierre is looking for an answer. Pierre is pointing out a problem. But Pierre doesn't know what the solution is. And maybe he does. But I'm assuming he doesn't, okay? So good brother Pierre from International Law Mock, hopefully he'll take the time to look at this video today because I've learned a lot from good brother Pierre. And I'm hoping that today good brother Pierre will learn something from me about the solution to the problem of the veto power. All right? Let's go ahead and jump on in. So, what is the problem? The problem is called amnesia. Why do I say amnesia? You see, the 5 permanent council members are pretending to have amnesia. Amnesia of what? They're pretending like they have forgotten about the Moroccan treaties that established this charter in the first place. They are proclaiming that they have the primary responsibility to act on behalf of all the states on planet Earth. But where did they derive that power? Through a charter, right? Through the charters where they get the power. But what established the charter is the question. Who was the power of the pen that established the charter? So when you start to now go backwards in law, in history, it takes you back to the origin, right? And from the origin, now you can bring it back full circle to the present of December 2022. So today I'm going to take you back to memory lane. Then I'm going to pull you back forward. Because guess who else suffers from amnesia? Moors. Moors have forgotten our own history. You see, the people perish by the day for a lack of knowledge of self. So therefore, if the charter turns around and tells you that this charter is about, for the Security Council, about functions, and powers. Somebody's got some power. Right now it's in the hands of the P5. But how did the P5 derive that power? We'll talk about that today. Let's jump on in and deal with the amnesia problem of Moors and the pretended amnesia of the P5 permanent security members of the United Nations Charter. All right? Now keep in mind, Moors, today what I'm going to tell you, I tell you with respect. I'm going to teach you law and history, but by no means am I trying to undermine the values and the values and the principles of the Charter. The Moors must respect the 193 member states of the Charter, because the Charter is trying to do its job. Don't blame the Charter as being a problem. What's the problem? People, certain administrators sitting in the seats. You don't blame the Charter in its principles. You blame the Charter in the principals. Who's the principal? Okay, here's the principals. These are the principals. But what about the principals? See, if I say China is a problem, well, that's not an accurate statement. You got to look at the context, right? It's not the nationals of China. China's got over 1 billion people. It's 99% of Chinese nationals don't know nothing about Moroccan treaties. But the 1%ers know about Moroccan treaties. It's the administrators of China. That's the problem. The principal, right? Principal, that's overseeing China. The principals, the principals of France. Everyone sitting in the chairs of the 3 branches of government, they know about these Moroccan treaties, not their nationals, not their citizens. So don't blame the state. Blame the heads of state. That's the point I want to make to the Moors today. Okay? So see the chart is positive, but what's negative? The administrators that's overseeing millions and billions of people. All right? Let's go ahead and jump on in and fix this amnesia and help out good brother Pierre. Okay. So I'm going to be building up, right? So we've got the Treaty of Madrid, 1880, right? We all know about that. We also know about the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1787. We know about the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1836 that was building up to the Treaty of Madrid, 1880, right? Right? So the Treaty of Madrid is all about what? Right of protections in Morocco. So right now, the United Nations Charter is responsible for what? Protections of planet Earth. But also protecting who? Moors. Because Moors have been subjugated, right? So, Treaty of Madrid, 1880, is about the right of protections in Morocco. So everything we talk about today is in Morocco. Protections in Morocco. And so somebody's supposed to be maintaining security over Morocco at all times. Okay, build up. The Act of Algeciras of 1906, right, was about what? Reigning in the order, maintaining security in Morocco, setting forth certain provisions and reforms to reign in the order of who? All the signatory powers, i.e. the colonists. We're talking about that today. Then we'll get into the Treaty of Fez of 1912. We're building up. And then next, we'll get into United Nations. The League of Nations of the year 1920. Right? So you have the Treaty of Fez, 1912, and then you've got the member states of the League of Nations of the year 1920. We're building up. So once the League of Nations was dissolved, what was next? The Charter of United Nations. Right? Charter of United Nations is a result of the League of Nations being dissolved. We're going to learn about that today, and there's a rhyme and a reason as to why I'm telling you this, because we're talking about security. We're talking about who is ultimately responsible for maintaining security in Morocco. What part of Morocco? The empire. And the empire is vast. Okay, let's go ahead and get started so the Moors can learn something today. That way we can no longer suffer from amnesia. We can point out what the P5 members of the Security Council are trying to act like they've forgotten, and we can help out good brother Pierre to answer his problem. All right, let's go ahead and jump on in. So what's happening? So the charter talks about protections, but so does the Treaty of Madrid. It talks about protections. But when you read the Act of Algeciras and you go right into the preamble, what do we learn from the preamble? What was the preamble all about? Okay, good brother Marcus, let's go ahead and read that.
Inspired by the interest attaching itself to the reign of order, peace, and prosperity in Morocco, and recognizing that the attainment thereof can only be effected by means of the introduction of the reforms based upon the triple principle of the sovereignty and the independence of His Majesty the Sultan, the integrity of his domains, and the economic liberty without any inequality, have resolved upon the invitation of His Sharifian Majesty to call together a conference at Algeciras for the purpose of arriving at an understanding upon the said reforms, as well as examining the means for obtaining the resources necessary for their application, and have appointed as their delegates penitentiary the following.
All right, so good job, good brother. So let's go back and recap. Listen to what the preamble's about. The triple principle, right? Okay, listen. Inspired by the interest attaching itself to the reign of order. There's an attachment happening, right? An attachment. What is an attachment? Attachment is an addendum, right? We'll talk about that today. An attachment to something, okay? So inspired by the interest attaching itself to the reign of order. Who's attaching itself to the reign of order? The signatory powers. So the colonies are attaching themselves to Morocco through a proper written instrument called a treaty, convention, arrangement. All right? So listen from the top. Inspired by the interest attaching itself to the reign of order, peace, and prosperity in Morocco. You hear that word prosperity? This is why you keep saying the word economic and financial in all of the United Nations Charter and their resolutions. The word economic, you'll see it a lot, which represents what? Prosperity, right? The ecosystem, etc. Okay, let's start from the top. Inspired by the interest attaching itself to the reign of order, peace, and prosperity in Morocco, and recognizing that the attainment thereof can only be effected by means of the introduction of reforms based upon the triple principle of the sovereignty and independence of His Majesty the Sultan. So who is His Majesty the Sultan today, in today's time? It's the Moorish states, because there's no more Sultan. So who immediately became the successor? The Moorish government, right? We'll talk about that today, the Moorish government. So the Sultan is talking about the triple principle. So it says, by an invitation of His sovereignty and independence of His Majesty the Sultan, the integrity of his domains, and economic liberty without any inequality. That's the triple principle, right? So what's the triple principle? The introduction of reforms based upon the triple principle of the sovereignty and independence of His Majesty the Sultan, the integrity of his domains, and economic liberty without any inequality. Have resolved. Have resolved means what? They've agreed. Upon the invitation of His Sharifian Majesty to call together a conference at Algeciras for the purpose of arriving at an understanding upon the said reforms, as well as examining the means for obtaining the resources necessary for their application, and have appointed as their delegates plenipotentiary the following. So what's happening here? The Sultan has reigned in the order. He has summoned all the colonial states to him, right, to introduce reforms to deal with the triple principle of the Empire of Morocco. These are instructions. These are orders set forth, right? So as you go down, who did he make responsible for all of this? Okay, so you got all these colonial states that's agreeing to this, right? I'm just scrolling down really quickly. It finishes up the preamble with who furnished with full powers. Who furnished full powers? All the signatory powers. Furnished with full powers. What full powers mean? They got a constitution, right? They got full powers. They got the proper written instruments to say that the proper authority of their state. Who furnished with full powers which were found in good and due form, have in conformity with the program upon which His Sharifian Majesty and the powers have agreed, successively discussed and adopted. So what reforms did they put in place? Okay, so now you get into chapter 1, a declaration relative to the organization of the police. Well, who oversees police at the charter? The security members, 5 security members, right? The P5, the permanent security members, right? Think United Nations Charter and start now doing your correlations right here about the Act al-Jaceres. Because the Sultan and the Moorish governments were responsible for overseeing these principles of reigning in the order, right, in the empire. Now, so listen. So chapter 1, a declaration relative to the organization of the police. Who's overseeing police right now? The United Nations, the Security Council, right? Chapter 2, a regulation concerning the detection and repression of the contraband of arms, right? So Security Council can deal with contrabands of arms because they can put sanctions on other states, okay? Chapter 3, an act of concessions for a Moroccan state bank. Who oversees banks? Well, the Security Council of the United Nations can sanction all of your banks. They can freeze all of your accounts, right, of your state. And as well as the heads of state. They can freeze all the accounts and assets of any state and heads of state. Listen, chapter 4, a declaration concerning a better return of taxes and the creation of new revenues. So when the Security Council gets involved, if they put sanctions on you, they just shut down your economics, right? And now if they come into your state, they're freezing up things as well. Listen, chapter 5, a regulation concerning customs of the empire and the repression of fraud and smuggling. Chapter 6, a declaration relative to public services and public works, right? So the Security Council of the United Nations is affecting another state's public services and public works when they put sanctions on them. They're dealing with diplomacy and they're dealing with military reforms that come into your state. Chapter 6, a declaration relative to public services and public works, and having decided that these different documents might usefully be coordinated in a single instrument, they have united them in a general act composed of the following articles, right? So then you got 7 articles, and all those articles have provisions. But who's ultimately responsible for this? Okay, you go right into it, and immediately it tells you who's responsible for maintaining these reforms. Article 2, the police shall be under the sovereign authority of His Majesty the Sultan. It shall be recruited by the Mazin, which is the Moorish government, from the Moorish Mohammedans, commanded by Moorish kings, and distributed in the 8 ports open to commerce. So immediately it goes right in to tell you the Moors are governing this. Governing what? Reigning in the order and overseeing the security, the general security of the empire. So the Sultan and the Moors responsible for this, right? Now, going back up. Let's go back up to the preamble, because I want to show you something, Morris. This is very important what we're going over at this time. You have to really, really see the details of what's happening at this time with the preamble. The Treaty of Fez of 1912. Why are we going to the Treaty of Fez of 1912? It's because after the Treaty of the Act al-Jaceres of 1906 came out, it required France to come in and assist the Sultan to start now enforcing the treaty, because the Sultan was borrowing money from the colonists, and the colonists was freezing the Sultan. The Sultan wasn't able to enforce his rights. So he got who? France to come in and enforce it, right? So a lot of Moors say, well, not a lot of Moors, but I'm sure the rumble is, well, why does AMPAC study session keep talking about the Treaty of Fez of 1912 if it's been dissolved in 1956? Why would we keep going over a document that allegedly has been dissolved? It's null and void. It's because Moors, you got to understand, the principles in it is what we as Moroccan Moors were supposed to be enforcing. But since Moors were sleeping and Moors had been usurped, France was doing the job for us. And before France was doing it, the Sultan was doing it for us, because the Sultan himself is a conqueror of the Moorish Empire. So the Sultan was collecting taxes on behalf of Moors, and then France came in and started collecting taxes on behalf of Moors and reigning in the order. This is what Moroccan Moors were supposed to be doing. So these chapters in this treaty is principles that Moors have to maintain. We have to take these words and make them organic again, the principles of it. Okay, the spirit of the words. You got to understand why I keep going back to this. These were instructions set forth for France. But where did the Sultan of France get these instructions from? The Act Algeciras of 1906. As an addendum, right? Okay, we don't get into that. Now keep in mind, what's germane? We're talking about the Permanent Security Council. What did they derive their functions and powers? How did the charter come to be? We're building up. It all started with your Moroccan treaties, and then your Moroccan treaties were not being enforced by the Sultan, so France comes in to enforce your Moroccan treaties on behalf of the Sultan and the Empire of Morocco. Okay, so right in the preamble, what are we reading? The government of the French Republic and the government of His Sharifian Majesty, desirous of inaugurating a regular regime in Morocco based upon internal order and general security, which will make it possible to introduce reforms and to ensure the economic development of the country, have agreed upon the following. So you see these words? Where do we see these same words? In the Act Algeciras, in the preamble, right? So here's one of the most important words right here. The Sultan allowed France to be in a status of inaugurating. What does inaugurating mean? It put France in the office, right? To oversee the empire. Okay. Definition of inaugurating. Okay, so this can be found more. Definition of inaugurating, right? Inauguration. This is what's called online etymology dictionary. A lot of Moors are familiar with it. You can find it online. You go down to the definition of inauguration. Here, Brother Marcus, can you read this for us, please?
Inauguration, noun, ceremonial investiture with office, act as solemnly or formally introducing or settling in motion anything of importance or dignity. 1560s, from French inauguration, installation, consecration, and directly from Latin inauguratum, nominative inauguratio. That's a hard one. Consecration, presumably originally installment under good omens. Noun of the action from past particle, Participle. Thank you. Participle stem of inaugura. Take omens from flight of birds. Consecrate or install when omens are favorable. From in, on, in, from pi, root, in, or in, or en, and the inaugurate, to act as a inaugure. Predict, see, augur.
Okay. Thank you, good brother. Your brother Marcus. Good job, brother. All right, here we go. So in etymology dictionary, inauguration, right? We know the basic understanding of it, right? So inauguration is a noun, person, place, or thing, right? So it is what? A ceremonial investiture with office. So France is coming into an office, right? So we know inauguration is coming into an office. France is coming into an office to oversee what? The entire empire. The Sultan stepping down, allowing France to step up in 1912. To do what? To oversee the provisions of the Act Algeciras of 1906, as well as to oversee the provisions of the Treaty of Madrid of 1880, as well as to oversee the provisions of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1836, etc., etc., etc. Any Moroccan treaties France had jurisdiction over and crossed the entire empire, right? So watch this. So France now is responsible for what? Putting in what? Instituting what? A regular regime. What is that? That's like the charters, the regular regime. Where? In Morocco, based upon what? Based upon internal order That's the act out of Sarah's. The Sultan was reigning in the order, and the General Security, Permanent Security Council of the United Nations, where France sits, right? Which will make it possible to introduce reforms. That's the Act out of Sarah's of 1906 preamble. And to ensure the economic development, right, of the country have agreed upon the following. So that's the preamble. Okay, let's get into Article 1. Your brother Marcus.
Article 1. The government of the French Republic and His Majesty the Sultan have agreed to establish in Morocco a new regime comprising the administrative, judicial, educational, economic, financial, and military reforms which the French government may see fit to introduce within the Moroccan territory.
Okay, so France is obligated to establish these principles, right? So France is the principal, i.e. the principal, right? As the sole state and administrator over the entire empire on behalf of the Sultan, all by themselves. The Sultan's given them full powers to enact a new regime and reign in the order and maintain economics, right?
This regime shall safeguard the religious status, the respect and traditional prestige of the Sultan, the exercise of the Mohammedan religion and of all religious institutions, in particular those of the Habas. It shall include the organization and reformed Sharifin Makhzen.
Pause. Okay, so France is responsible for what? Shall include the organization of a reformed Sharifian Makhzen. That's a reformed what? Moorish government, right? So the charter is acting like the Makhzen government overseeing all states. You gotta put these correlations together, okay? The charter is acting like the Sharifian Makhzen, okay? Continue.
The government of the Republic will come to an understanding with the Spanish government regarding the interests which this government derives from its geographical position and its territorial possessions on the Moroccan coast. In like manner, the city of Tangier shall retain its recognize distinctive characteristics, which will determine its municipal organization.
Okay, so at one time, Tangier was where the organization was located.
Yeah.
Okay? So Spain relinquishes jurisdiction in 1914. They said, yeah, we're done with this whole having a jurisdiction where the organization would be located. So where does France now move the organization to? He moved to Paris, France. That's where the League of Nations is located. We're going to learn about that. That's what happened in 1920. So Spain relinquishes jurisdiction in Morocco in 1914. Then France turns around and establishes the new organization in Paris, okay, called the League of Nations. We're going to get to that. Then the League of Nations is dissolved in 1946. But what happened in 1945? The United Nations was established. So when the League of Nations was dissolved, the United Nations was coming into what? Full force. Only because France allowed it to happen. So the organization left Tangier, and France was responsible for overseeing the organization. Now you got the Charter of the United Nations is an organization that France was overseeing in 1912, okay? Article 2.
Article 2. His Majesty the Sultan agrees that henceforth the French government, subject to prior notification to the Makhzen, may proceed to such military occupation of the Moroccan territory as it deemed necessary for the maintenance of good order and security of commercial transactions, and may exercise every police supervision on land and within the Moroccan waters.
Did you learn something there? We learned that in the Security Council, right? What is the Security Council's main objective? To maintain diplomacy, to maintain economic sanctions. If they have to sanction someone, police them, and military force, right? So Article 2, His Majesty the Sultan agrees that henceforth the French government, subject to prior notification to the Makhzen, may proceed to such military occupation, that's United Nations, of the Moroccan territory as it may deem necessary for the maintenance of good order throughout the empire and the security of commercial transactions, that's sanctions, that's economic, and may exercise every police supervision and land within the Moroccan waters. This is Security Council. See how they're talking? Okay, listen. Article 3.
Article 3. The government of the Republic pledges itself to lend constant support to His Sharifan Majesty against all dangers which might threaten his person or throne or endanger the tranquility of his states. The same support shall be given to the heir to the throne and his successors.
Okay, listen. Article 3. The government of the Republic, what republic? France. The government of France pledges itself to lend constant support. That's called permanent support, constant, to His Sharifian Majesty, which is the empire, against all dangers which might threaten his person or throne or endanger the tranquility of states, of his states, right? His states. States, plural. So the Sultan owns states, plural. Well, what states, plural? It was all the signatory powers. Well, who were some of the signatory powers? Okay, I'll show you an image. Okay, let's go back to it. Here's your signatory powers. France, Great Britain, Russia, and United States of America. But back then it was the USSR, right? These are all states in Morocco. Which lets you know that even Europe is what? Morocco. Because if the France recognizes the states, that the states belong to the Sultan, his states. And France's job was to oversee all the states, security and economics, police, military, you name it. That was France's job, to maintain the security. So not only is this land over here the west of the empire of Morocco, but based upon even France's saying states. Back then in 1912, they recognized the empire as being one single state. So what other states are they talking about? All the other European states, etc., etc., etc. Let's continue. So whose job is it right now to oversee all states? The Security Council members and the charter members, all 193 states, are responsible for helping to maintain peace and security on planet Earth. Are you following me so far? Okay, let's continue. Article 4, listen.
Article 4. Such measures as the new regime of the protectorate may require shall be established by decree upon the proposal of the French government, His Sharifian Majesty, or the authorities to whom he may have delegated his power. The same procedures shall be observed in the matter of new regulations and the modifications of the existing regulations.
So the charter put together new regulations to protect states. And France was responsible for that all by themselves. All by themselves. So when they dissolved the Treaty of Fez of 1912, right? They dissolved in 1956. When France stepped down, someone had to step up to be the successor over the empire to maintain security. And who was that? It ended up being the League of Nations, and then it ended up being the United Nations Charter. We'll talk about that. Article 5.
Article 5. The French government shall be represented to His Sharifian Majesty by a commissioner resident general, representative of all power of the Republic in Morocco, who shall attend to the execution of the present agreement.
Continue.
The commissioner resident general shall be the sole intermediary between the Sultan and the foreign representatives and in relations which these representatives maintain with the Moroccan government.
Okay, so right here, pause. As you can see, France has a lot of power here. They even using the word sole, right? Somebody's a sole representative to deal with all other foreign representatives. So not only is France as a republic overseeing the empire, France is putting in what? A middle manager to also assist. This is a lot of power France has got. But wait, how did France get this power? The Sultan gave it to him. How did the Sultan end up with the power? Because Moors acquiesced because they got conquered by who? The Arabs, the Ottomans, right? So originally, who's supposed to have this power? The Moorish government. Well, how do I know? Go back and look at the Treaty of the Act d'Algeciras of 1906. It talks about the Moors are the authority, right? Okay, but now France is coming in to oversee it in 1912 because the Moors still hadn't woke up, okay?
In particular, he shall have charge of all matters relating to foreigners in the Sharifan Empire. He shall have the power to approve and promulgate on behalf of the French government all the decrees issued by His Sharifan Majesty.
So the Moors are supposed to have the sovereign power by decree to maintain any convention arrangement that's set forth in Morocco, the same way France is doing. France is controlling the pen. It's like the precious, the Lord of the Rings. What is the precious? The pen of Morocco. Whoever oversees the treaties, that's who's controlling the ring, the precious. And at this time, France is doing it. And they got the sole power. Okay, make the correlation back to the Moors. What do Moors should have if France had that power? Because Sultan gave it to them. That means the Moors got that same sole power to control all foreign representatives in Morocco by decree because of our treaties. Listen, okay, Article 6, let's pay attention.
Article 6. The diplomatic consular agents of France shall be charged with the representation and protection of Moroccan subjects and interests abroad. His Majesty the Sultan pledges himself not to conclude any act of international nature without the previous approval of the French Republic.
You see what the Sultan did? He gave all his power to France. But guess what France's responsibility was? Okay, Article 6, the diplomatic and consular agents. See, diplomacy, right? Consular agents, right? So you look at the Vienna Convention of 1961, it talks about diplomatic relations. You look at the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations of 1963, consular relations. Right? You see the correlation what's happening here, how the resolutions of the United Nations is based upon some of these provisions that came out of the Treaty of Fez of 1912. Article 6, the diplomatic and consular agents of France shall be charged with the representation and protection of Moroccan subjects and interest abroad. So all interests, France is overseeing all interests, but what's most important here? France is overseeing Moroccan subjects. Who's Moroccan subjects? People who think they're what? Negro, black, colored American, i.e. Nabkas. That was France's responsibility. That goes back to what treaty? Okay, let's go back to the treaty of 1880. Treaty of Madrid, 1880. Article 15, paragraph 1 says, any subject of Morocco. Okay, let's go back to Treaty of Fez. France's job was to protect who? It's about representation and protections of Moroccan subjects, not Moorish Americans. Moroccan subjects, not Moorish Americans. Ain't no such thing as Moorish Americans. It's a made-up misnomer. Treaty supreme law of the land. And the language in the treaty says Moroccan subjects. Of what? Morocco. Okay, let's go back to the other treaty. Treaty of Madrid. It says what? Any subject of Morocco. So if you're a subject of Morocco, Morocco has Moroccans. Not Moorish Americans. It's Morocco. You're supposed to return to Morocco, not return to America. So it's about what? Treaty of Madrid is about what? Right of protections in Morocco. Okay, go back to Treaty of Fez. These principles matter more. Article 6, from the top. Diplomatic and consular agents of France shall be charged with the representation and protection, right of protections, of Moroccan subjects that are in Morocco and interest abroad. And the Sultan could not get involved. He ostracized himself. His Majesty the Sultan pledges himself not to conclude any act of an international nature without the previous approval of the French Republic. This is a very important part of the treaty. Because see, when France stepped down in 1956, and the Sultan stepped down in 1956 as well, during what's called the Franco-Morocco Agreement of 1956, March 2nd, the Sultan didn't have no say anyway. He didn't care because the treaty didn't allow him to speak up. So when the Sultan stepped down and France stepped down, guess who was supposed to automatically step up? Moors. We are the successors of all the treaties. There's always a successor no matter what in a state. States don't die. They just multiply. Who's ever up next is a successor in any family tree. Who's supposed to be up next? Esau. Esau will always be here. Who is Esau? The so-called indigenous people. Indigenous is a generic word for Esau. Article 7. Good brother.
Article 7. The government of the French Republic and the government of His Sharif and Majesty reserve unto themselves the right to determine by mutual agreement the basis of financial reorganization which will, respecting the rights conferred upon bondholders of Moroccan public loans, shall make it possible to guarantee the commitments of the Sharif and Treasury and collect regularly and revenues of the empire.
So France was responsible for collecting the revenues of the empire. So first they say Morocco, now they say empire with a capital E. Right? Not lowercase e. Lowercase e represents what? A common noun. Uppercase E represents what? Proper noun. Right? So in a sentence, a boy, boy represents noun, common noun, lowercase b. But then when you identify the name, that boy named Esau, capital E, proper noun, right? So proper noun, capital E, person, place, or thing. So the empire is representing, if it's a capital E, as a noun, that means the empire itself is a state that's void of a central government, but yet it still exists nonetheless. And France was responsible for collecting all the revenues of what? The empire. Did it just say Morocco? It's empire. It's vast. Let's continue.
Article 8. His Sharif and Majesty declares that in the future he will refrain from contracting directly or indirectly any public or private loan, and from granting in any form whatever any concession without the authorization of the French government.
Okay, Article 8. Remember I showed you, Morris, that Morocco, the Kingdom of Morocco, didn't become a member state until 1956, right? But yet, the so-called original parties to the charter signed up in 1945, and the king then finally become a member state until 1956, 11 years later. Well, there's no coincidence. He was not allowed to become a member of the United Nations Charter because he could not make any decisions regarding the empire. Only France could represent it. So every time you see France's name on a charter or anything else, you always going to see this absent of Morocco as a state name. Because France is representing the entire empire that included Morocco. Because France is acting as a power of attorney on behalf of the empire and also overseeing the Security Council, i.e. the Charter of the United Nations. Got to tie this back in. Okay, Article 9, brother.
Article 9. The present treaty shall be submitted to the government of the French Republic for ratification, and the instrument of said ratification shall be handed without delay to His Majesty the Sultan. In faith whereof the undersigned have drawn up the present act and have affixed their seals thereto. Fez, March 30, 1912, 11 Reba 1330.
All right, good job, brother. So 9 articles, right? Okay, let's take it to the top. So more to say, well, J. Bay, since this treaty got dissolved in 1956, why do we keep going over it? Because these are the principles that were set forth. Even though the treaty got dissolved, guess where these principles got transferred to? First, it got transferred into the League of Nations. We're going to learn about that. Then when the League of Nations got dissolved in 1946, guess what those principles got transitioned to? Into the United Nations Charter. So even though this treaty got dissolved, all the words transferred to the League of Nations. And when the League of Nations got dissolved, all those words and principles transferred to the United Nations Charter. And all of this is stemming back to what? The Act Algeciras of 1906 and its reforms. And the Act Algeciras is based upon all the other previous Moroccan treaties, i.e. Treaty of Madrid, 1880, Treaty of Peace and Friendship, 1836, etc. Right? Okay, listen, Morris. So what do you call this? If this treaty was setting forth specifics for France regarding the previous treaties, then what would you really technically call this treaty? You know what you call this treaty? An addendum. This is an addendum to a finished contract. What finished contract? What contract that was concluded and ratified? Act Algeciras of 1906, right? So if the Treaty of Act Algeciras of 1906, right, is supported by the Treaty of Fez of 1912. The Treaty of Fez of 1912 ended up being an addendum. Okay? Treaty of Fez ended up being an addendum. What's the definition of addendum? Okay. Now we're talking contracts, right? Let's go back over to Etymology Dictionary. Okay, good brother Marcus, go ahead and read the definition of addendum.
Addendum, noun, 1794, an appendix to a work, a thing to be added. From Latin, addendum, neuter, or addendus, that which is to be added. Gerundive of adhere, to add, to join, attach. See add, verb. The classical plural form of addenda.
Okay, good job, good brother Marcus. Addendum, noun, person, place, or thing. But a noun can also be what? An idea, right? So the idea, now from your manifest into now what? From your abstract, you manifest it into an actual thing, right? So an addendum now becomes an appendix to a work, to a contract, right? It's a separate document that's an attachment to a previous contract, okay? It is a thing, now, person, place, or thing. A thing to be added, okay? A thing to be added. So it's an appendix to a work, a thing to be added, right? So the Treaty of Fez was added, okay? So it is what? Add to, join, attach, addendum, right? Where do we see this word attach? Okay. Go to Act Algeciras, 1906. Preamble. Inspired by the interest attaching itself to the reign of order. These are all attachments to other treaties. So the Treaty of Fez itself is also an attachment to, an appendix to the Act Algeciras of 1906 to now enforce the referendums of that treaty, as well as other previous treaties. It's an addendum, right? So what's the addendum? What's the difference between addendum and amendment? Okay. Okay, good brother. Definition of amendment.
Amendment, noun, early, 13C. Betterment, improvement, C, 1300. Of persons, correction, reformation. From the old French amendment, ratification, correction, advancement, improvement. From amender, to amend, see amend. The sense expanded 17 Charlie, C, to include corrections of error in a legal process, C, 1600, and alteration of a writ or bill to remove its faults.
All right, so an amendment goes back to change a well set up contract. So you go back into that contract that's finished, that's concluded, you change words, provisions. However, an addendum does what? It just attaches itself to another contract that's already finished. It makes it stronger by adding more language and not going in and amending language that was already in the other contract. Okay? So the Treaty of Fez, 1912, started to enforce the previous contracts as an addendum to enforce other treaties, conventions, and arrangements. Okay? So after 1912, what happens? France starts to enforce this treaty. What happens next? World War I and World War II. Why? Because France is now trying to collect the money, trying to maintain all these different reforms in Morocco. What is France trying to enforce? The administrative, judicial, educational, economic, financial, and military reforms. Where? On behalf of what? Morocco, and more specifically, where? Article 3, all the states. So it's causing havoc, right? Because someone's acting like a bill collector, right? As well as what? The police. France act like the police. France act like the military. France act like the IRS. France is acting like everything, a one-man show, by utilizing the Moslem, the government, the Moorish government as well. So who is taking the place of the Treaty of Fez now? The charter members is doing what France was doing, which is overseeing all the economics, all the diplomacy, and military reforms of planet Earth. Okay, let's continue. Listen, we're building up. Now, in 1920, the League of Nations is established. Well, who was overseeing the League of Nations? France. The League of Nations was established where and founded where? In Paris, France, because France is overseeing it. How did France get that power? Because they're utilizing the Treaty of Fez of 1912. And the Treaty of Fez of 1912 is an addendum back to all the Moroccan treaties, recognizing that the Treaty of Fez also is a Moroccan treaty. So now France goes and establishes the League of Nations on behalf of reforms where? In Morocco. So France is obligated to create Moroccan reforms. Everything he's doing on behalf of the Moroccan Sultan and the Empire of Morocco. So anything France enacts is Moroccan law, because he's acting like a power attorney on behalf of what? Morocco and Moroccans. So the League of Nations itself becomes now an addendum to all the previous other contracts, such as the Treaty of Fez and the Act out of Sarahs, etc. Okay, let's go ahead and read it. Small print.
No worries.
Can you read that, good brother?
Yes.
Okay.
Between 1920 and 1939, a total of 63 countries became member states of the League of Nations. The convent forming the League of Nations was included in the Treaty of Versailles and came into force on 10 January 1920. The League of Nations being dissolved on 18 April 1946. Its assets and responsibilities were transferred to the United Nations.
Pause. The League of Nations was dissolved in 1946. Its assets and responsibilities were transferred to the United Nations. And the League of Nations was established by France because of the mandate of the Treaty of Fez of 1912. And the mandate of the Treaty of 1912 is the mandate to maintain as an addendum to all the other Moroccan treaties. So the League of Nations was based on Moroccan law, and that Moroccan law principles was transferred where? Into the United Nations. Right? So let me increase that for the viewers at home so they can see. The responsibilities were transferred to the United Nations. What was transferred? All the principles of the League of Nations. You see how it's building up? Okay, let's continue to read in just a moment.
The League's greatest extent was from 28 September 1934, when Ecuador joined, to 23 February 1935, when Paraguay withdrew, with 58 members. At this time, only Costa Rica, 22 January 1925, Brazil, 14 June 1926, Japan, 27 March 1933, and Germany, 19 October 1933, had withdrawn, and only Egypt was later joined on 26 May 1937. The members listed from their earliest joining and alphabetically if they joined on the same day at that time were Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Bolivia, the British Empire, Canada, Chile, China, Colombia, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, El Salvador, France, Greece, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, India, Italy, Liberia, and Netherlands. The New Zealand, Nicaragua, Norway, Panama, Paraguay, Persia, Iran, Peru, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Siam, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Uruguay, Venezuela, Yugoslavia, Austria, Bulgaria, Finland, Luxembourg, Albania, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, and Irish Free State, Ethiopia, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, Turkey, Iraq, the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, and Ecuador. Of the 42 founding members, 23 or 24 counting the Free France were members when the League of Nations was dissolved in 1946. A further 21 countries joined between 1920 and 1937, but 7 had withdrawn, left, or been expelled before 1946. The countries are listed under the year in which they joined. The word withdrew indicates the country left on its own choice. The word left indicates the country was, the country that ceased to exist or annexion by Germany, Italy, or the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was expelled from the League in 1939 after its invasion of Finland and was the only country to face that measure. Despite formulating the concept and signing of the convent, the United States never joined the League of Nations, and some relatively isolated sovereign states in Asia also did not join, including Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Mongolia, Nepal, and Bhutan. Likewise, none of the European microstates of Andorra, Liechtenstein, Monaco, San Marino, and the Vatican City ever sought membership in the organization. And the 9 Congress of European Nationalites, an organization of the League of Nations held in Bern, Galicia, Basque country of Catalonia, the first 3 autonomies of Spain, and recognized as a nation. In any case, they were not independent, but were represented by the Spanish government.
Thank you, good brother. All right. Okay, so good job, good brother Marcus. What should we learn here as we continue to scroll down? Okay? So what we're learning is that the United States of America and the United States International Organization, the United States never joined the League of Nations, right? They didn't become a member, right? Why? Because they was hating on France, because France had what? A pen, right? The United States hates the fact that any sovereign is above them. Treaties is the supreme law of the land. So France at the time was acting like a sovereign over the United States and starting to do what? Collect taxes, acting like the sheriff, debt collector, military, controlling economics, right? The security, right? In Morocco. But check this out. So you got the member states of the League of Nations that came into existence 1920 to 1946. United Nations comes into full force 1945. While the United Nations is coming into force, the League of Nations is being dissolved. You see how it's slightly overlapping? Because what? It's transferring those principles. What principles? The principles of the Treaty of Affairs of 1912. Well, where did the Treaty of Affairs of 1912 get its principles? The Act out of Sarah of 1906, etc., right? So listen. So you come on down, right? So there's the map. Anybody want to go to Wikipedia and see it? Look at all these states, 63 states, right? Was a part of the League of Nations. Never think that the United Nations Charter of 1945 was the first to come up with all this aggregation of states, right? So all these states had already bought in to what France put together regarding reforms in Morocco. Now look at this. So this is just a quick list, right? So from 1920, founding members, right? So you got all these founding members, right? Look who's on there. Isn't that interesting? Look, you see that China? Look at that. Look how their flag used to look. Huh? So China has been a part of this membership of the United Nations that used to be the League of Nations. That tells me that China knows all about Moroccan treaties. Because they knew that France was overseeing all the reforms where? In Morocco. So China cannot try to claim that they have amnesia about our Moroccan treaties because they've acquiesced to be what? A member state in Morocco. You see? So they come under Moroccan law. Let's continue. Look at all these states, right? This is the League of Nations, right? 63 states. Now, wait a minute. You kind of see how this is a little bit of sequential order, alphabetical order? Right. H, I, J, K, L, M, 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 N. Wait, the M is missing.
Morocco.
Where's Morocco? Well, why couldn't Morocco be a part of the League of Nations? Because France had the power to pick. And the Sultan couldn't make no decision. France was acting like a duality to represent Morocco and France. Right? Because here we go, we got all these states, right? All these states, right? But wait, there's France, right? France. So France is on the list, but Morocco's not. But yet France put together the League of Nations on behalf of what? The Moroccan government. But Morocco's not on the list. Why? Because you go back to the Treaty of Fez, right? I'm not going to belabor it, but let's go to it real quick. We go down to Article 6 and Article 7 talks about it. Article 6, His Majesty the Sultan, Treaty of Fez, 1912. His Majesty the Sultan pledges himself not to conclude any act of an international nature without the previous approval of the French Republic. That's why Morocco's not on the list, right? Okay, let's go back to it. Okay, so you got all these states, right? All these states came on with the League of Nations. All these states, okay? Here's 1920. All these states were part of the League of Nations. All of these states, okay? But wait a minute. Well, we're getting down to it. Where was the United States of America? Not to be found, right? Because they're not a member state, right? We learned that. United States of America, United States never joined the League of Nations. They were hating, right? So after this, what happens when the League of Nations get dissolved? Well, they tell you already at the top that when it got dissolved, the League of Nations was dissolved in 1946, right? And everything was transferred. Where was everything transferred to? So all its assets, all of its assets and responsibilities were transferred to the United Nations as an addendum. Okay, now you come over to the United Nations Charter of what? What year? 1945. And everything in here now, including the preamble, and the preamble says what? Will the people of the United Nations determine to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in a lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small, and establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. So if the preamble is about maintaining treaties, and the charter is established based upon the principles and the assets of the League of Nations, and the League of Nations was established by France, and France got that power from the Sultan to maintain reforms in Morocco, That means at the end of the day, when you now come down to the Security Council, Moors, you come down to the Security Council. Now you start understanding when they say, well, who's in charge of the Security Council? Well, according to the contract of the charter, it is the 5 states, right? The 5 states plus 10 more. But ultimately, who was the responsibility to maintain security in the Empire of Morocco? It's the Moorish government. So now that France stepped down and the Sultan stepped down in 1956, who stepped up as the successor? United States of America. Because United States of America still got their name on the treaties. They automatically became the successor. This is why they go around the world bullying everybody. How are they bullying everybody? It's because they're utilizing both the charter and our Moroccan treaties to maintain security on planet Earth. And this is why the United States goes around shaming everybody and doing what they want to do as a belligerent, because they've been able to maintain the diplomacy and control diplomacy. They've been able to control economic sanctions. And they've been able to control the military around planet Earth because they're using our Moroccan treaties, and the charter is also based in Moroccan law. The United States of America is going around the world utilizing our treaties in a negative way. Why? Because the Moors acquiesced. It was ultimately our responsibility, Moors. Our responsibility. Let's go back to the Treaty of the Act Algeciras of 1906. So once you get past the preamble, right? Watch this. Once you get past the preamble, guess whose job is to maintain security in Morocco? It's the Moors, right? So you look at the Moorish government, right? So you got Moorish government, right? We learned this is Article 2 of the Treaty of Act Algeciras, right? But we learned if you slide over, see what France says we are? France says we're what? Moroccans. The Moors are Moroccans. Moroccans, that's in French, right? So you come down, we were responsible for overseeing what? The police. Okay, you go to chapter 2. Chapter 2 talks about what? Regulation concerning the detection and repression of contraband arms. It was the Moors' job to maintain the usages of arms on planet Earth. That's everything from nuclear weapons on down to a handgun, right? So all these world wars that's been happening on planet Earth, it was the Moors' responsibility to ensure, as the Knights Templars, as the custodials over our own treaties, it was our job to maintain security of planet Earth. Article 23 and 27. Let's go to it. Since we have control over the military, that means we got control over all arrangements, all treaties, right? All conventions in Morocco. Article 23. Go ahead, brother.
Article 23, the accomplices in the offenses set forth in Articles 20, 21, and 22 shall be liable to the same penalties as the principals. The elements determining the complicity shall be adjudged according to the laws of the court in charge of the case.
So the Moorish government is supposed to be enforcing Article 23 against who? Any principals that are complicit, right? Are complicit in violating arms and violating anything regarding to Moroccan law. And right now, the Security Council members of the United Nations, the P5, are controlling what we should be doing. They're controlling arms around planet Earth. Okay, go to Article 27. Let me show you something. This is what the United States of America didn't want Moors to find out. They've been keeping this a secret, right? But not necessarily a secret because it's been right in front of our faces on the World Wide Web, okay? Your brother, Article 27?
Article 27, the sale of arms condemned by the Moorish government shall be prohibited throughout the Sharifan Empire.
So we control our arms. It's our job as Moors, not the Security Council members. The Security Council members, Moors, let's go back to it, are working on behalf of Moors right now. They are what you call de facto permanent member states. What I mean when I say de facto, of fact, according to the charter, they're legally sitting in those chairs. But from a de jure perspective, who was supposed to be overseeing them? The Moorish government, the Moxie. So when they say they're primarily responsible for the security of planet Earth. Well, it sounds good, but guess what? They're overseeing what? A great enterprise. What's the enterprise? All the states on planet Earth, all the diplomacy, all of the sanctions and economics, and they're overseeing the military. This is what they're overseeing with veto power. So you got to understand something, Morris. As you start to tie in all your treaties, all of your charters, everything that happened in Morocco, at the end of the day, you have to understand, you go down to Article 123, right? Act of Sarah, 1906, Article 123. Good, brother?
Article 123. And last, all treaties, conventions, and arrangements of the signatory powers with Morocco remain in force. It is understood, however, that in case of conflict between their provisions and those of present General Act, the stipulations of the latter shall prevail.
So, when Moors go to the United Nations, what is one of the things that we should do as Moors? The first mindset we should have as Moors is, what's the purpose of having treaties, Moors? If treaties supreme law of the land, what is our obligation? To maintain peace and security because we control the pen of security in Morocco. Our job is to be a peace-loving state that oversees all states with the power of our pen. Our job is to come in and deal with the Security Council members. Now I'm projecting way out. Way out. But you got to understand, you got to be nearsighted, you got to be farsighted to understand the power of our treaties is not just to collect taxes. Our power of our pen is supposed to come in and break up this whole veto thing. We have the power to come in and say, no, there shall be reforms. Because we oversee Moroccan Moors of the Moslem of the Sharifian Empire, oversees all treaties, conventions, and arrangements. And this whole veto thing has to end. There's nothing wrong with the principles of the charter because the charter is based in Moroccan law. But right now, these 5 members are acting like a belligerent. The United Nations, in their opinion, is only 5 states. And that's not the truth. It's 193 plus states on planet Earth. And through our treaties, we got the power to say this whole veto thing comes to an end. Because we're responsible for the charter. We are the grantors of the charter. The United States of America has been holding on to the pen, the precious, the ring, the Lord of Rings. They've been acting like the Lord of Rings because the Moors have acquiesced and allowed the United States of America to have a limited successor power over our own charter, over our treaties, and over all arrangements and conventions in Morocco. So this veto thing needs to stop because it's creating a problem. Good brother Pierre said, this is a problem. But Pierre don't know the answer. What's the answer to the test, good brother Pierre? Moroccan treaties. Moroccan state governments can come in and pick up where France left off and do good for the people. Noble Ali said what? Coming to this with love instead of hate. We have to now bring the world back, right? Because fallen humanity. Think about these permanent 5 states. All kind of human rights violations. But since they got the power of veto, can't nobody police them. Because as soon as the 193 member states want to go in and deal with one of these belligerent 5, guess what they do? They veto and say, nah, y'all can't come do nothing to us. Because they got the power of veto. One state can veto what the entire General Assembly wants to do. Who has the power to change and make reforms in Morocco according to any treaty, convention, or arrangement? Moroccan Moors. To bring back what? equality amongst large and small states. And right now, the large and small states are getting what? Hoodwinked by 5 states. We have the power of the pen, Moors. This is the power your treaties give you to do what? Uplift fallen humanity. What's the purpose of enforcing treaties, Moors? It ain't about just getting rich. Noble Ali said he came to us first because we had fallen the furthest. Now we have to come back to the table amongst nations in the affairs of men. We got to fix this problem that even good brother Pierre is pointing out, that no one's been able to fix. Why? Because the United States of America has been left as a successor to our pen, the precious. They're the Lord of the Rings. But technically speaking, substantively speaking in law, from a perspective, not interpretation of law, absolute law, the charter is Moroccan law. So how do you get the world to cure itself, right? They got good Noble Drew Ali on the front of a lot of magazines carrying a woman out of the water, right? And it says, carrying her out of what? The cares of the world. What is he carrying her out of? He's stepping up to a rock, right? He's walking out of water and the woman's unconscious. He's taking her out of what? Acquiescence. She's got amnesia. He's also taking her out of admiralty law and bringing her back into natural law, organic law. What does the rock represent? Earth. The land, earth. Right? So the rock, what is the rock? Earth. Earth is the third rock from the sun. You got 3 planets in orbit, right? You got Mercury, Venus, then Earth. Those are the 3 planets. We call them rocks, right? So Earth is the third rock from the sun. So the Moor's job is to uplift all of fallen humanity. Yes, does it start right here in our own front yard in Morocco and then spread out from there in ripple effect? Yes. But one of the things that we can project way out is to fix this problem that's happening with the veto. Because when we go to the International Court of Justice, we're bringing our treaties with us. And we're going to be able to prove that the Moroccan Moors, the Mazin, the Sharifian Empire, the Moorish Empire has jurisdiction over the charter. And the only thing the Moors should be concerned with is bringing back equality, bringing back inalienable and unalienable rights for all of mankind. We must do great things with our treaties, Moors. Our pen is very powerful if we do the right thing with it. That must be understood. And these 5 member states that claim to be permanent, they're acting like they have amnesia, that they don't know about our Moroccan treaties, but they know. So the only person we really need to fix that has amnesia is Moors who think they're Americans. We're not Americans, we're Moroccans that need to do what? Return back to Morocco. Establish our Moorish constitutions in Morocco, accede to the treaties, and start to enforce all 123 articles of the Acta Adversaris, including the preamble to maintain sovereignty and independence, interior domains, and economic liberty without any inequality in Morocco, and that including overseeing the charter as the grantor and successor over any treaty, convention, or arrangement in Morocco. I end with that. Islam.